Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this evening's online briefing session around creating places for people in Castle Vale. My name's Joe Green. I'm Travel Demand Manager at Birmingham City Council, and I'm coordinating the Places for People programme in Birmingham that we launched back in June. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Rebecca, who will be moderating the online chat, and also Riddy from Sustrans, who are a delivery partner on this project with the City Council. If you do have any questions or comments during the presentation, please do use the chat function and type those, and we have got time at the end to pick up those questions, but hopefully we will address quite a few of the points in the presentation. The plan for this evening is we'll start off with a presentation as detailed to provide a bit of context to the Places for People programme, an overview of the Emergency Active Travel Fund and how we've approached that in Birmingham. Riddy will then talk a bit about the low traffic neighbourhood approach and an example of that from elsewhere. We will touch on how there's been a bit of engagement to date and initial feedback, and then we'll look at the specific measures proposed for Castle Vale, but also some sort of future delivery and the next steps around that, and then finish off with an opportunity for any questions that haven't been covered during that presentation. So, as I mentioned, Places for People was a new programme that we launched in June, and it's all around reclaiming local streets for people, so that they feel able to walk and cycle on those, but also so that it's an environment where children are able to play out, neighbours and friends are able to socialise. It's an environment where people experience cleaner air, it's quieter, and it's a much safer environment, so safe from speeding traffic and things like that can put people off doing some of these more sociable activities. And the way in which that is achieved is through measures that try to ensure less traffic, particularly through traffic or traffic cutting through an area or running through residential streets. In terms of where this has come from, this is something that we've been keen to develop for quite a while now, but it was really emphasised in the draft Birmingham transport plan that we published for consultation in January at the start of this year. Seems like quite a long time ago now. And the draft transport plan had four big moves, one of which is prioritising active travel in local neighbourhoods. And what that seeks to do is enable people to walk or cycle for a lot of local journeys, and it's a way that people can get around their area most of the time where they can. What that seeks to do also is remove the car dominance that we experience in some of our residential streets, and also that residential neighbourhoods and local centres become places where people rather than traffic are put first. Although that was featured quite heavily in the draft transport plan, it also links to a number of other strategies and plans that the City Council and others are currently progressing. Also at the start of this year, Cabinet approved a new walking and cycling strategy for Birmingham, and again within that, low traffic neighbourhoods were mentioned as something that we were keen to progress alongside car-free school streets. This is also something that is really important in relation to Birmingham's road safety strategy, and in trying to create safer roads that operate in as safe a way as possible, and 20-mile-per-hour speed limits, which we've been rolling out across the city for a number of years now, trying to have 20 mile per hour as the default speed limit on all residential roads and in local centres across Birmingham. We also have a draft clean air strategy, and tackling air pollution is something else that we're keen to do across the city, and this plays a part in improving transport options and choices, so that people are able to travel in ways that are both safer and more sustainable and better for the environment. Last year the council declared a climate emergency, and in response to that set up a Route to Zero task force. And transport is one of 7 work streams set up to look at how the council achieves the carbon reduction targets set in within that as a response. As well as road safety and clean air, walking and cycling and safer streets can play a big part in all sorts of other benefits, particularly around health and well-being. One way in which that's achieved is through people increasing physical activity, and the West Midlands has a physical activity strategy on the move that something like Places for People contributes towards. It can also have really big benefits in terms of people's mental health and emotional well-being, and creating an environment that is more conducive for people to not feel that they're the street that they live on is blighted by speeding traffic or air pollution from a real sort of volume of traffic. And it's not just Birmingham City Council that is looking to bring this forward as something we're seeking to do. Low traffic neighbourhoods were mentioned very clearly in the new cycling and walking plan that the government, through Department for Transport, published in July of this year. They talk about how the low traffic neighbourhood approach can be used to reduce accidents, pollution, noise, and also this sort of outlines really how low traffic neighbourhoods work, which really you'll touch on a bit more at the moment, but it is around installing road closures or point closures to restrict through traffic, but still allowing any road in the area to be accessed by people who live there or are visiting. So that sort of explains how low traffic neighbourhoods and Places for People was something that we've been keen to develop for a while. But as people will be fully aware, back in March of this year, everything changed. And as a result of the COVID-19 global pandemic and the subsequent lockdown that the UK was placed in towards the end of March, a lot of things sort of changed almost overnight. One thing was a significant reduction in traffic across our roads, I think at the height to below a third of usual levels. And as a result of that, a lot of people commented on how they experienced quieter streets, improved air quality, and a more pleasant residential environment where they lived. They were able to sort of socialise with neighbours. Obviously, it's a social distance when we were doing the clap for carers and things like that. And a lot of that was a result of reduced traffic and removing through traffic from a lot of these streets. So in a way, through some quite horrible circumstances, we had almost like a sneak peek of what low traffic neighbourhoods could look like. And the consequence of that was that a lot more people were walking and cycling, often for their daily exercise or for recreation. Some people were sort of shopping more locally by foot or by bike. We did have some issues arising from that around speeding and other dangerous driving, and that sort of partly shows how sometimes where there's less traffic, some of those issues can be more prevalent, and we do need to address that too. And the other big challenge this has all presented is around public transport, both in terms of less capacity on buses, trains, trams, but also some people's confidence in using public transport. And if everyone moves from public transport to private transport, but replaces these trips with car trips, then that's only going to create more problems in our residential streets around the volume of traffic, around speeding, congestion, parking pressures. So I think what we're looking to do here is to go back to that original sort of lockdown phase and think, well, how can we bring about some of those benefits without quite sort of severe restrictions? And that's something that Places for People is trying to achieve. And the City Council sort of looked at how we were going to address this new challenge we were presented with through the emergency Birmingham transport plan that we published in May this year. This emergency transport plan was based on the same vision and big moves as the draft transport plan that we consulted on at the start of the year, but adapting that to the very changing circumstances, and probably an even greater need to provide safer space for walking and cycling, and also to enable this new phenomenon that we've become familiar with now of social distancing. We made a specific commitment within the emergency transport plan to deliver 2 low traffic neighbourhood pilots alongside some other sort of early measures, which is where Castle Vale comes in, but also to look at how we will extend this across the whole of Birmingham over the coming months and years. And then the really good news is that we had an opportunity to secure some funding to enable this to happen, which for a local authority is always a very welcome thing. The Department for Transport, I think towards the end of May, announced their Emergency Active Travel Fund. This is part of a £2 billion package to create a new era for cycling and walking over the next few years. And the first £250 million of this is being made available this year through the Emergency Active Travel Fund. And the first thing that this is intended for is to implement some temporary interventions that help to create that environment that makes walking and cycling feel safer. I think it's fair to say that the Department for Transport have been very clear around how they expect local authorities to use this. This is money to be used quickly, and it's also money to be used effectively. And to secure this funding, councils have needed to demonstrate that they have swift, meaningful plans that will reallocate road space to cyclists and pedestrians. And the DFT themselves, in the guidance, did identify that one of the quickest and cheapest ways of doing this is road or point closures, which can be used to create low traffic neighbourhoods, as proposed within this programme. The Emergency Active Travel Fund is being released in two tranches. The first tranche, which we're currently in the process of delivering, is for this sort of current period of July to September, and there will hopefully be a second tranche of funding for October to March. And in terms of some of the sums involved, the funding is secured through the West Midlands Combined Authority, and the 7 councils within the West Midlands Combined Authority area have come together to put forward proposals as part of this. In the first tranche of funding, we had an indicative allocation of just over £1 million for Birmingham. I'm very pleased that our application there was successful, and the strength of the West Midlands proposals overall meant that we actually secured more funding than we asked for, which is a bit of an unusual position to be in. So in the end, Birmingham's receiving 1.1 million through the EATF Tranche 1. And we're also putting in £500,000 of council funding to enhance what we're delivering there. And then in terms of low traffic neighbourhoods and places for people, the Tranche 1 proposals include 2 low traffic neighbourhood pilots in Kingsheath and Lozells, which we're looking at delivering the first phase of in the next few weeks. And then also some early demonstration measures in Castle Vale, also in Bourneville and Moseley, ahead of proposed further delivery as part of this second tranche of funding over the next 6 months. And I'll come back to what's proposed for sort of tranche 2 towards the end of the presentation. And here, briefly, there's just a bit of a map showing the Emergency Active Travel Fund schemes that we're delivering across Birmingham. It includes a number of pop-up cycle lanes, but also measures within the city centre, the low traffic neighbourhood pilots, the early measures, and also some work in a couple of local centres where we're again trying to provide more space for people on foot and to socially distance. I'm now going to hand across to Riddy from Sustrans to provide a bit of information around what low traffic neighbourhoods are. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Good evening, everyone. So, low traffic neighbourhoods. The general idea of a low traffic neighbourhood is to keep the residential streets for the residents. So to stop those additional motor vehicle journeys where people are using the area to cut through or speed through. So we cut those out. And that is often done where you've got a group of residential streets in the middle, and then they have sort of surrounding what are called distributor roads around them, and they're the ones that sort of take the traffic. And in terms of Castle Vale, that's looking at sort of your Kingsbury Road and Chester Road around the estate. Everyone is still going to have access to all the streets. There's no access stopped. It might just be that you have to drive around a slightly different way to get to certain parts of the street where the point closures are, so where those filters are. And it also, so it just looks to reduce the traffic generally in the area, and it just makes the area a little bit safer for some of those activities that Joe was talking about, like walking and cycling, but also a little bit more socialising when we're able to do that safely and yeah, with more than a few people. And then yeah, and so that's the general idea, is just reducing that additional traffic that doesn't from the cars that don't live in the residential area, and remove those from the area. Thank you, Joe. Move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so this is an example from London, from Waltham Forest, and these two pictures are of the same street from before and after the low traffic neighbourhood went into place. This example is a little different because it was an area-wide project and it had significant funding, so it's a little bit different from the way that we are looking at it, but the principles are the same. It's removing through access for cars and making more space for walking, cycling, and in the case of this particular street, socialising. So we've had, you know, the opportunities for some of those cafes and restaurants to spill out onto the street, just creating a much nicer environment, reducing the pollution, reducing the congestion, and yeah, just making it a nicer place to be. So this yeah, the impacts of this are, and the impacts that they've seen in Waltham Forest are increased walking and increased cycling, so up to 32 minutes a week from each individual, and 9 minutes of walking and 9 minutes a week of cycling. But that's not the only benefits they've seen across this this low traffic neighbourhood that they've created. Life expectancy's gone up by up to 7 months in some cases, and economic benefits have also gone up. So there's less empty shops, less empty retail spaces, and more people using those shops. And the Transport for London also looked at this, and they said that people might spend a little less each time they go on foot, but they go more often, so they overall over the course of a month end up spending a bit more. So it's good for the local economy as well, and those local shops, and just, yeah, good for air pollution and reducing that as well in the area. Okay, the next slide, please. Thank you. Oh yes, I'm going to hand back over to Joe to talk a little bit more about some of the engagement and some of what we've had responded to, some of the responses we've had on Commonplace as well.
That's great. Thanks very much, Riddy. And you sort of had a flavour of what low traffic neighbourhoods look like. Now we want to sort of move into how we bring this to Birmingham and to Castle Vale in particular. I think the first thing I want to sort of say is engagement is really, really important for delivering low traffic neighbourhoods. These are schemes that need to be shaped by people who live in and visit the area. And it has been a real sort of challenge over the past couple of months for a couple of reasons. One, we've been delivering or progressing these schemes to a very short time scale, and also because of the current situation, there are a lot of restrictions in place that have limited what we've been able to do. But we do genuinely want to involve local people in these schemes, and as measures go in over the next few weeks, we want to really use that as the starting point for getting people involved in this. We have tried to do what we can under these conditions to ensure some engagement. We've set up an online platform called Commonplace, which has information about the Castle Vale proposals, and that's somewhere where people are able to give feedback and make comments, and that will continue to stay in place. We've also put some posters up in the local area and have been promoting this via social media. Working with Riddy, we've been available via phone, text, email. I know some people from the local area have got in touch with questions. We're looking to have discussions with your local councillor, and we've done a letter drop across the area, which is where some people may have found out about this evening's session, put up a comment box where people can make comments, and organise this online briefing session. So although I appreciate some people feel that they haven't been fully informed of what's happening, we have been trying to get word out as much as we can within the methods available to us at the moment. But what we would like to be able to do is go much further than that, and this will need to be sort of caveated with anything we do has to be organised in line with the latest guidelines and any restrictions that are in place, and it may be that we have to organise some things differently to either limit numbers or ensure that they can be carried out safely. But some things that we are looking to do is to have a resident survey that people across Castle Vale can complete and give views through, to organise some more sort of public meetings, ideally in person rather than online, and similar sort of drop-in events, which, as I say, might need to be either limited numbers or registration. We'd also like to do some sort of on-street pop-up activities. I know that's something Sustrans have done previously with some of their projects, and also design workshops where people can talk to us around what other changes they might like to see happen. We're very happy to meet with local community groups or resident groups, and with some of these future schemes we will be carrying out consultation on what's proposed, and also looking to involve people in the monitoring of them. Some people have been in touch to say that they'd like to do traffic counts, or also some air quality monitoring. So I think that there are lots of different ways that we can engage people in this. We acknowledge that it has been a bit limited to date, and without making too many excuses, there is a bit of a reason why, but it is really, really important that as we move forward, local people are leading what's happening in and around the area. As I mentioned, we have set up the Commonplace site, and within there is a project page for the Castle Vale Places for People measures, and we have had some comments and feedback through that already. It's sort of 50-50 in terms of people who live in the area and don't live in the area, and it's also sort of 50-50 in terms of how people feel around what's proposed. So some people feel that it's sort of fairly positive, while others have concerns, and some are more neutral. People can make more than one comment if they wish on this. So if people have already commented, but after tonight they have other things they'd like to add, please do go back and make more comments on that site, and we will continue to monitor that. We'll continue to keep that open throughout what's delivered over the current weeks and months. But I think with Castle Vale, when we first put that information up, we included details of 2 proposed measures on Yatesbury Avenue and Cosford Crescent, and we'll look at those in a moment. But just to sort of share some of the initial feedback on those 2 proposals, again, some people feel positive about it, others less so. We've had some people say it's a good idea because there are real issues with speeding cars on the estate, and this could potentially help to address that. Also, it will make it less attractive as a through route, and create an environment that's quieter and safer for people to walk, cycle, but also just to be in the area. And they feel that a trial is something that's a good thing for Castle Vale. As I say, there are other people who disagree. They feel that there aren't any issues, that the street's perfectly fine as it is. They don't see the point in blocking off the end of Cosford Crescent. And also there's some sort of concern about what the effect of that might be with cars starting to take some alternate routes and using Abington Way and other roads as a cut through. And that's certainly something that we will need to monitor very carefully at an early stage, to make sure that if there are any issues there, something's done to address that relatively soon. I'm just going to hand back to Riddy to talk about these 2 proposed early measures as to where they are and what they'll look like, and then we'll look a little bit more about the next steps and what happens next. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Joe. So as Joe mentioned, the 2 filters that we are looking at are on Yatesbury Avenue and Cosford Crescent. The reasoning for Yatesbury Avenue is it was one of the roads. So sorry, let me take a step back here. I was also working with Sustrans on a project in Castle Vale and surrounding areas called Age Friendly Tyburn for a period of time, just over a year or so. And we were looking at how to make the area more age friendly, easier to access and easier to get around. So we were working with lots of local community members and residents, and one of the main concerns was speeding and the number of vehicles on some of the linear roads that got cut through the estate. So some of those long straight roads, Yatesbury, Tangmere and Farnborough. And so Yatesbury is one of the ones that came up as a road with lots of speeding on it, where the cars come from Kingsbury Road at the top and whiz round the corner. So that's why Yatesbury was selected as one of the roads to have a filter. Lots of people have come back and said Farnborough would be a better option. There are more cars that speed along there because it's wider. And this is something we will look to consider if and when we hear about the next rounds of funding. But because it's a bus route in itself, that would require a little bit more thought process and funding to look at how we manage the buses through there as well. And then the Cosford Crescent one. So with a low traffic neighbourhood, you look to cut out north to south and east to west wrap runs, as they're called. So where people are using the estate to cut through to avoid the Kingsbury Road or to avoid the Tyburn roundabout or to avoid the Spitfire Island. So they're using the estate to cut through just to avoid those junctions. And so by putting one on Yatesbury, we're stopping that speeding and cutting through, but then also by putting one on Cosford, we're just stopping people from going directly just down Cosford Crescent back onto Tangmere and speed along there. So we know that this isn't necessarily perfect, but we would, as Joe said, we'll be monitoring it closely to see where there may be displacement and where the traffic does move on to. And so the filters are going to be planters. So this is the one on Yatesbury. So there'll be 3 planters next to each other up on the east side of Cosford Crescent. We are hoping to work with a local group to help us plant those up, maybe paint them as well, just so that it makes it more about a space for people as well. Which is part of what this whole project's about, is creating more space for people to be out and about on their streets. So there'll be three there, and there'll be enough gaps between them to allow cyclists through. And then on Cosford, as it's a much wider junction, there'll be more planters there, looking at making sure that the full width of the junction is covered. And behind it, there's still the space for the drop curbs where people can still use that access to cross the road. So any more to say on that, Joe? I think
that's brilliant. Thank you very much. So yeah, just to sort of bring this up to where we are now, these are sort of 2 temporary trial measures that we'll be looking to implement in the next week or so. But it is really the sort of the start of a process, and as you can see from this diagram, very much a sort of a staged approach. So what we're looking to do in the first instance is make some sort of quick temporary changes to the streets, but then by doing that, looking at how we can work with people and start to use that street space differently. It is a temporary trial, but if it's something that is successful and popular, then we will be able to look at how we might start to make those changes more permanent, and also other changes that we might like to bring in across the wider area. And just to sort of illustrate a little bit with some photos from around the country what that might look like. As you can see from sort of stage 1, we are able to sort of do some very quick temporary changes to the street, and I think this is something that Sustrans have done previously with some short-term trials that they've run where they've just closed roads for a day or a few days. What we're looking to sort of move more into with these measures is sort of towards stage 2, where we're sort of using these planters to create a slightly different street layout. Longer term, following on from a trial and seeing how that goes and what the sort of feedback is, we can then look to make things a bit more permanent, as you see in that image on the right hand side, and then it really does start to sort of transform the area, and you get a very different feel to the streets around where people live. So to summarise sort of like the what happens next and next steps, these first trial measures will be implemented this month. I understand that work to put them in will begin at the start of next week, and probably sort of Wednesday, Thursday time will be around the point that the planters will go in and the road closures will begin. hopefully over the next week or so, alongside that, we'll be able to organise some sort of pop-up events so that we can, one, support the delivery of those measures, but two, talk to people about what they think, how they're affected, be on the ground. So if there are any issues, we can get those sorted out very quickly. And as I've said before, they are sort of temporary trial measures initially, and we will be keeping a very close eye on that. Because it's being delivered using an experimental traffic regulation order, we do have potential to make some changes and modifications. So going back to the plan and the concern around people rerouting through other more local streets, if we do need to move some of these locations to make that something that's not possible, then that is something that can be considered as part of this. But I think we do need to acknowledge that there is a bit of a bedding in period with this approach, and it does take a bit of time, probably at least a week or two, for people to adapt and adjust and to reroute accordingly. So although we can make sort of changes where that is needed, I don't think that's something that we're going to want to do like every single week. But there is a real sort of balance there between giving something a try, but being able to respond to any issues that are arising. And as we've alluded to, this is very much the start of an engagement process now for what we hope will be coming forward through Emergency Active Travel Fund Tranche 2. And to give you a bit of an idea of some of the timescales we're planning for there, we are hoping to very soon be informed of the outcome of our funding submission for Tranche 2. We are waiting for the Department for Transport to get back to us on that one, and hoping that will be sort of mid-September. But we have sort of put together a bit of an indicative delivery plan because these are projects that will need to be delivered over the next 6 months. And what we'd look to do sort of first off is confirm the study area for somewhere like Castle Vale. That's relatively straightforward because the estate is sort of so well defined and almost sort of contained to some extent, but it's looking at what some of the issues are and where there's a need for other measures. And then October, November time, having engagement with local residents and businesses, schools, community groups to inform some of the options that we'll consider and to develop and design some other measures. And then in early December to look at consult on those draft proposals or layout options, and maybe even going back to that staged approach, doing some short-term trials for a day or a week around some other measures, some other closures or changes to the street space. We'd then refine those proposals in line with people's feedback and look to deliver further measures to create places for people in Castle Vale sort of February time next year, and then look at what we do beyond there. And this is where we are looking to have an ongoing Places for People programme within the Transport and Highways Capital programme year on year to continue to develop and deliver this across Birmingham. That brings us to the end of the presentation this evening. There's now an opportunity for us to respond to any questions that haven't been covered by that presentation. There are some frequently asked questions that we've already sort of received, and I can sort of go through some of those, but there may be some specific bits either from the chat tonight or from the commonplace comments that we've already received. So what I'll probably do is pause for a moment and ask Rebecca to just highlight if there's any particular questions we should address, or otherwise I can go through some of the frequently asked questions around Places for People.
Thank you, Joe. We've been quite quiet on tonight's Q&A, but that is still open if anybody wants to pop any questions in there, and we can pose those to Joe and Riddy as appropriate, so please don't be shy. What I've also done is I've had a bit of a look at the feedback that we've had through the Commonplace website and through our connected inbox, and picked out a few questions that are coming up there, because if one or two people have asked them, I'm sure there are others to whom they're of interest. So just 3 questions stood out on that front. So one is, why are we doing this in Castle Vale rather than somewhere else in Birmingham, particularly given that the Castle Vale estate already has traffic calming and a 20-mile-an-hour speed limit? So why Castle Vale? The second one, in a similar sort of vein, if we're looking at putting in planters and things like that, why are we thinking of these modal filters, these sort of point closures for motorised vehicles? Why are we not considering things like chicanes and additional traffic calming? A third one is some issues people have raised around parking by Jaguar Land Rover staff. With the JLR site neighbouring Castle Vale, people are reporting that there are some issues with staff parking, particularly on pavements, and what can we do to address this as a problem in the area. We've also just had an additional one popped up in the Q&A, which I'll also publish, about have we got a baseline of traffic information that we can use for our ongoing monitoring as part of this project. Thanks, Joe.
That's great. Thanks very much, Rebecca. And monitoring and how we'll monitor the impact of these schemes and determine whether or not they've been a success is one of the frequently asked questions. So I will touch on that in a moment. I mean, I think in terms of why Castle Vale, it will probably be useful if Riddy, she did mention briefly in terms of ageing better in Tyburn, but one of the things we've looked to do with the emergency transport plan and the emergency active travel fund is to look at where have there been sort of previous projects or initiatives and also engagement with local residents that mean that we're not almost starting with a blank sheet of paper, but there is something that we could potentially build on, or there were issues that have been identified and possible solutions there. So part of the reason why is we feel that Places for People in Castle Vale is a very nice natural follow on from Ageing Better in Tyburn, and that was part of the rationale. Riddy, do you want to add to that? Sorry to put you on the spot a bit.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. So the Ageing Better project was looking at all of the elements that low traffic neighbourhoods look at. So how to make an area more accessible, easier to get around, feel more like a space for people, feel like a safer space for an older community to come out and enjoy, but also to remove some of the barriers, the physical barriers for people to come out and spend time in their local community. So although Castle Vale doesn't necessarily have the same problems that we established elsewhere, like limited time on crossing on the Green Man crossings, Castle Vale doesn't actually have enough formal crossings. So that's one thing that a few people raised. So it's all the elements of trying to reduce that the problems that are caused by additional traffic. So if there's not that much traffic, it does make crossing the road a bit easier. So then we do look at that element of what we were looking at from the Tyburn project. And Tyburn was initially selected. I'm using Tyburn because that was the project was created before the ward boundary changed. Ward boundaries all changed. And it was selected because it was part of the Ageing Better in Birmingham project, which was a project over 6 years and funded by the Big Lottery. So it's a much wider project, and they selected the area initially as an area that could benefit from some additional support to make some better social connections. And that's partly why we were brought on. So yeah, it's kind of an extension of what we were doing and ties together some of the findings from that project very nicely into action that we thought might take 5 or 10 years, but actually we're looking at in 5 or 10 months. So that's amazing.
Always nice when those opportunities come along and we are able to respond to issues that have been highlighted and raised through other schemes. I think the question around why modal filters and not chicanes, I think that there are sort of various options that we have available to us in trying to address some of the transport issues that communities experience. Modal filters can be a very effective way of reducing through traffic, whereas chicanes is more a sort of a traffic management measure to reduce speeding, but it can be very effective in that, along with other physical traffic calming measures like speed bumps. I think sort of generally, when you're looking on a more sort of permanent solution, things like speed bumps and chicanes are actually much more expensive than modal filters that can be delivered relatively cheaply. So part of it is, to be honest, a sort of a cost consideration, but that's not to say that we wouldn't look at delivering other things alongside modal filters. And when you look at low traffic neighbourhoods across the country, then they do include things like safer crossings, and I already mentioned about the need for safer crossing points in Castle Vale. It might be looking at walking and cycling routes alongside the roads and how that's included. So I think we're particularly looking at modal filters at the moment to try and bring about some changes that reduce through traffic, but we also acknowledge that there are lots of other issues that need addressing, and there are other different things that we will use to tackle those, one of which is parking, and Castle Vale, like many other parts of the city, experiences all sorts of issues around inconsiderate or illegal or dangerous parking, and we are sort of keen to try and tackle that too. I think it's sort of partly trying to accommodate the parking need and demand that there is from local residents, but then looking at where there's other demand coming, so partly around school drop-off and pick-up times, but also somewhere like JLR, where it may be that JLR staff are parking in the local area rather than where they should be, or where they could be travelling by other means. Something we do with workplaces in Birmingham is support with workplace travel plans using something called Mode Shift Stars, and JLR have actually engaged in that previously, and we have worked with them for their sort of Castle Vale site as well as elsewhere across the region. So I think what we sort of try and do there is, one, how can we support employees to travel to work in other ways where that is an option, but where they do have to drive, make sure that that's accommodated by the employer and not having a negative detrimental impact on the local area. But it may be that if, as we get into the next phase of the project, if people feel that one of the biggest concerns is that sort of parking, then we can look at different parking restriction options as well.
Can I just add to that? So I did have a couple of conversations with JLR, and they are willing to have conversations. So if we, you know, if there is still a continued parking issue with staff from there, I'm fairly certain we could have further conversations with them and look at how the parking restrictions could work together alongside what they might do as part of their workplaces schemes.
Brilliant. And then the last question that we had around monitoring. Obviously, this is a trial, and with any trial, you want to be able to judge whether or not it's been successful. What we're firstly looking to do is look at what information and data that the City Council and partners already have that we can use as a bit of a baseline. So existing traffic counts, speed surveys, also with Transport for West Midlands, we have access to bus journey times. We are looking at where there's then a need to enhance that with some additional surveys to sort of set what the current situation is. One challenge we have there, as I touched on at the start of the presentation, as a result of COVID-19, there have been real sort of changes to transport and travel and how people get around. So over the last few weeks and months, it hasn't been a sort of standard picture, but moving forward, we will be monitoring this very, very closely, looking at putting in some of those sort of counts, surveys. We'll have people going out in the area doing observations. Keen to work with residents around any ideas they've got for how they might want to support that, and as I've said before, get involved with traffic counts or air quality monitoring. But I think the other thing that will play a very big part in how we monitor this is feedback from local residents and other stakeholders. So through the Commonplace site, through resident surveys, household surveys, we will be making sure that people are able to feedback on an ongoing basis, and also because it's a temporary trial, we have different options in terms of what happens next. If it goes really well and people like it and want it to continue, we can find ways of making that happen. If they feel that it's a good idea but it's not quite right and we need to change something, then under the experimental traffic regulation order, then we have the scope to do that. And if we put this in and the vast majority of people really don't like it and feel that it's making things worse and causing real sort of problems, then we would remove that and sort of take stock and look at what we might want to do instead. So I think it's sort of getting across this. Actually, this is a genuine trial, that it is a temporary scheme to try and brings about some improvements as we've outlined this evening, but it will very much be shaped by local people, and also we want to look at what else is needed on the estate and in the area to ensure that we can go back to that places for people where you feel that your lives are not sort of negatively impacted by antisocial driving, through traffic, speeding, and people do feel safe to walk, cycle, play and socialise. I think at that stage I'm going to ask Rebecca if there are any further questions or any other points anyone wants to make before we wrap up.
So there's nothing else popped up in the comments box, but just to reiterate to people that if you go away and think of something later, or indeed if you're watching the meeting recording rather than having been able to attend live, then we'd love to hear from you. Just use either the Commonplace website or email us at Connected. We'd love to hear from more people in Castle Vale about your thoughts on our proposals.
Okay, so on that note, on behalf of everyone from Birmingham City Council and Sustrans, thank you for joining us this evening. Please do get in touch with any comments, any questions, and please do look out for these initial early trial measures going in next week, but then also a lot of activity around that, around how we continue to create places for people across Castle Vale and bring about all the benefits that can achieve. Thank you very much and have a good evening.